Okay, well, what a exciting start to the morning with our strategy session, and to really kind of close the loop together with Alan talking about APIs and some of the anti-patterns that Rosemary talked about. We have upcoming Anand Tamboli, who is a frequent veteran speaker at API Days. And Anand is a serial entrepreneur, a global keynote speaker, award-winning author, innovation expert, and transformation specialist. Anand specializes in contemporary topics such as intersecting technology with people, and he often works with multinationals in the Fortune 500 and shedding light on some of the traditional problems, but with a new innovative approach. With that, I'm very looking forward to Anand's topic on how he built a new mousetrap and the lessons learned. I will hand over to Anand for the next 25 minutes plus 5 minutes Q&A.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Let me start with what happened around June 2016. So I was sitting in my office, and my team and I were talking about shipment of our recently crowdfunded product, One Button. In the middle of our conversation, I received a strange phone call. And the person on the other side, so the call goes like this: "Hey, Anand, my name is so-and-so. I'm a CTO of so-and-so company. We are a pest control company, and we wanted to discuss feasibility of building a smart mousetrap for our business." Now, the conversation continued, but I was skeptical. Like, what's going on? Is somebody trying to pull my leg? Like, CTO of a pest control company wants to build a better mousetrap. Sounds a little bit fishy, a little bit, somebody playing a prank on me. So finally, I asked him to email me, send me an email to set up a meeting, and we'll talk at your office. At first, that was the conversation. So even after the call ended, I was still skeptical. But after an hour later, I got his email confirming our meeting. So my team and I were about to start working on one of the most interesting products that we developed during our journey, and it was a smart mousetrap. Now, you may have heard the phrase that we know: build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. It's a commonly used metaphor to show the power of innovation. But my mousetrap journey or the project wasn't just a metaphor. It was a real product. It was an IoT product combined with integrated service from multiple players in the ecosystem. And this project taught us some of the critical lessons about product development. Not that we didn't know that, but every time you do something, new things pop up, especially in the connected product development. So when we talk about APIs and integrated services, etc., it makes more sense to talk about interconnected product development. And I'm going to share some of those lessons with you today. Of course, I will share other few examples as we continue. All right. So we kicked off the project after a month's time, and the project started. And usually, as the technologists go, like geeks and nerds and engineers like me, we started focusing on the product, like how the mousetrap is, how we can modify it, what kind of sensors we can put in, what kind of features we can add in, functions we can add it, so we can sense the mouse entry, mouse capture, send the alerts, etc., etc. But then, as we continued doing that, we started to understand the gamut of work that was involved, because it wasn't just fitting a sensor in a little mousetrap and sending alerts. It was more than that. And as we continued, it dawned upon us that what we have gotten us into. So product technically works. Like, that was the first thing. We made it work. What about product working in the field? So when you put a product like Mousetrap in a field, and field is not some posh environment all the time. Field could be much more outside in the harsh environment, could be all the way in the corner of a concrete building and things like that, attics and etc. So we started to understand there were some issues when people wanted to install it. Like this company wanted to send the technicians and they wanted to install the product. They would ask trivial questions like, how do I turn on the Mousetrap? And first of all, we thought, oh, we didn't think of on-off button because we thought it wouldn't be needed. But we do need on-off button. And why? Because they had this inventory of 15,000 such traps. So they said, look, we are not going to ship everything all together at once. That's not how the business model works. So some of the traps that are in the spiral, and so things that are at the bottom will come out probably 6 months later. That means you have to ensure that the batteries in them are still live, they're not dead after 6 months. We had to again go back and make those changes because now we understood the shipping conditions, storage conditions, and installation process. Then we also understood as to when the product goes in the field, it's not just you place the mousetrap and you're done. There are a lot of things that needs to happen in terms of arming the mousetrap, registering some of the details, and not just for the technology to work, but for the compliance perspective, because lots of the clients and most of the clients in pest control industry usually are like shopping centers. They are food processing units, food processing factories, pharmaceutical companies, and so on and so forth. And in all such environments, the compliance is strict. You have to maintain lots of records to make sure that when did you install and all those things. That meant we also had to deal with servicing constraints. As plus, let's say if there is a capture and our smart mousetrap sends the alert, what happens then? Right? So the technician or the operator would go into the field and they will do their job of cleaning, capturing that mouse, getting that mouse, and taking it to the safe place, whatever that might be. What happens to the sensor? What happens to the trap again? In some cases, they would just put it back without even resetting or things like that. So we had to think about all those things as we started to understand their servicing constraint, their storage, shipping, installation, all those processes. In fact, you would be surprised. I and my team, we've gone through a little mini mouse, not Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, the mouse masterclass. So one of their operations specialists taught us like how mouse behaves because the sensor has to counteract that. So think about it, a team of geeks, team of nerds learning about mouse. But that was a part of the process, that was part of the development. And it was important, right? One of the issues that we face, an interesting issue that we faced, one day we got a call from the team saying that, hey, there is a damage to the sensor, there is damage to the product. And we started to assess what happened. Outside, everything looked fine, but as we opened the box, we saw there's a water. And we couldn't understand how a water could get inside the box and inside the trap and inside the sensor. Like, how could that happen? Physically, it seemed impossible. Only later on, we understood that every morning there is a high pressure cleaning that goes on. And so people who do the cleaning, they don't care like your mousetrap is smart or not. They'll just go on spraying water. And because it's high pressure, it needed a trap wasn't designed for high pressure. It was designed for being waterproof, but not high pressure water being thrown at it. So those things we learn. Other things such as information going back and forth into CRM systems. So it's not that just we provided the backend and the API. The APIs needed to talk to CRM system in the backend. And so I believe they were using Salesforce at that point in time, a couple of other systems. We had to integrate those things, not just the mousetrap. So what seemed to be like a hardware development ended up being a full project. FDA record keeping, for instance, we didn't understand how FDA thinks and record keeping is important. We had to work with that piece. The point here is this very simple: is we often feel that we know technology, we can develop that product, it's easy, we have tools, we know the language, etc., etc. But the product creation isn't just the end, right? There's more to it. You always have to understand the whole customer journey. And I'm not saying just the first level customer, how the whole thing happens, right from shipping, storage, all the way to installation. And it maybe in API cases, it's slightly different. But if your API is being used in a product that does involve these things, you've got to understand these, right? And that's more important. Understanding customers' journey is critical, right? So we have to understand when our product, that the product that we are responsible for, that we have developed, comes into the picture, and when it goes out of the picture. And that handoff coming into the picture and going out of the picture has to be very seamless. That's the biggest learning as we went through, understood. And you might know, we all know in tech field that a term called CRUD or CRUD, right? Create, read, update, delete for the databases. And that's a classic example. Like every person who has worked on databases understands CRUD or CRUD, because that's a classic customer journey. They create, they read, they update, they delete the data, right? So that always has to be there. The same way, when we develop the product, we have to think like where the entire product journey starts and where it ends. So that's the point. Now, think in terms of the product ecosystem and not just the product, because as we start understanding that it's not just we are dealing with this smart mousetrap, we are dealing with CRMs, we are dealing with networks. And when I say network, I'm literally talking about telecommunication networks. We are dealing with telecommunication network, the product, the cleaning guys and whatnot. This helped us in maturing our conversation. So usually you would find a lot of people say that talking with techies is a little bit tough because they don't understand the product and all that. And I think it's sometimes true because we are so engrossed in technology that we develop. We are so engrossed in the languages and the features and functions. We fail to understand the whole ecosystem. If we do that, we come across as more mature in conversations. Customers feel and customers understand that you get it. You understand what you just don't. You're not just knowing. You're understanding what they're saying, and that builds a very different level of trust. Product development becomes easier. Product troubleshooting and number of things that follow become much more easier. And it also helps in developing or adding features or functions, because then you once you understand what's going on, you don't add features for the sake of it. Mostly there would be functions as needed, which essentially means your product becomes lighter, lightweight, less errors, less moving parts, and so on and so forth. So that's the clear advantage of doing all these things, right? We talked about high pressure water cleaning, but there was also another incident where there was a grease on sensor. So somebody, when they do this servicing of the mousetrap, as you might know, they use peanut butter sometimes for mouse bait. So somebody smeared, not, it was just by accident, they smeared that grease, that peanut butter on sensor, and sensor stopped working. So we didn't know until we found out in the dashboard that it's not working or it's giving false triggers and why it is doing that. There were other instances where we saw that battery was shorted and we couldn't feel that why would somebody short the battery? Like how is that even possible? These are the things we expect that technicians to be technicians, right? They understand technology, but that's often not the case. The point here is usually you care a lot about your product. Customers, operators, they have a lot of other things to care about. So they may not have the affection that you have with your product. For them, it's just another thing. They have all the liberty when we talk about, say, dealing with your product. Let me give you another example, another story from when I used to work with LG Electronics. This happened. We got a strange phone call, not a strange phone call. We got a customer complaints from another part of the India, and they were saying that we've got lots of washing machine warranty claims. And at first, we thought that it must be a usual warranty claim that's going on, but somebody somewhere in the team thought that, hey, look, why is it coming only from north part of the India? Right? Why don't we actually go out in the field and find out what's going on? What actually is happening there? And so a team of a few engineers went in asking questions, going into service centers and talking to people. And then we got this one comment from one of the service center boys. And he just said, yeah, that's common. Like, what would you expect? This is supposed to happen. I said, why? He said, look, you think people are using washing machine for washing clothes, right? That is not the case. What do you mean? He says, here in northern part of India, and especially in the regions like Punjab and Rajasthan, some of you know there is a famous drink, delicacy called lassi. So when this lassi is sold out in retail outlets like dhabas, for instance, or hotels, it's a huge, thick drink. Hundreds of liters of lassi you have to churn, and that's physically highly difficult. So these people use washing machine to churn lassi. Now think about that for a second, like how users are using your product. We never thought that would happen. I mean, we couldn't even imagine this is possible. But now it's happening, and we can't stop it. It's not illegal or something like that. So we have to always think like users have all the liberty. Users can use your product, your APIs, your hardware, your software in so many different ways that you can't even imagine. Think about another example. How many times you have seen people using Excel for running some sort of macros and automation? Did Microsoft design that for automation? Clearly they didn't, but that's how people are using it. When we understand users, how they use in their environment, it becomes much easier for us to anticipate what's going to happen. And that brings me to another point as to when we design system, when we design our product, we have to make it error proof. If it is possible, we should make it error proof, but if you can't do it without breaking the budget, then there has to be an alert system, alarm system, which notifies you that this is happening, right? So you can be on top of the situation. Otherwise, this lassi like washing machine like situations happen where we only come to know after so much problems have happened. And there is another tool which I want to recommend here. That tool I use quite often. It's called Premortem Analysis tool. It's my favorite tool. So doing Premortem helped me tracing lots of problems in the past, whether it was software, hardware, doesn't matter. Premortem essentially, it's a systematic technique that lets you think about the failures, the kind of failures that could happen step by step, the severity of the failures, how many times that might occur, how do you detect it, and so which is the prominent one, risks and all that. We're not going into detail of it, but you can see the link here. And I have written detailed article on it. If you are interested, always happy to, you go back to this article, bit.ly/API_PMA. Go to that link, you will understand what I'm talking about when I talk about Premortem analysis, right? Now, there's another thing. Remember I told you about dealing with the telecom network. So in our product, we did use LoRaWAN, if you know. It's a low rate data network, mostly sub-gigahertz, used for sensor communication at the long distance. And the LoRaWAN service provider partner, so there was another company. They had a different policies in terms of how much data and how much they allow within, say, 30 minutes or an hour's time. So there was a throttling in place. And sensors started giving false alerts for different reasons. I think it was a combination of this peanut butter being smeared on the sensor and this throttling being in place. And together, things started to happen. So pretty much sensor was giving false alert that there was a mouse captured when there was none. And when there is an alert, the sensor sends the signal. LoRaWAN network is throttling it, so it feels that a server isn't responding, so it would send it again. And it got into a continuous loop until battery gone low. And we didn't know that the throttling would be so severe. And so it was classic situation of cry wolf, or I should say cry mouse in our case, the sensor was doing. So we had to understand like what level of throttling the telecom provider is offering, and how do you deal with situations like this when it wasn't being done intentionally. So how do you deal with that? There's another case I will tell you about, another telecom provider within Australia. And I wouldn't name names, but there was a retail telecom service provider, and there's a wholesale one. So they buy the services from the wholesale guy. So there was a situation where imagine a customer complaining that I have a problem in my network, or my line is broken, a low data rate, whatever, a typical problem. You make a phone call to the retail service provider. The system will open a ticket, and that ticket will be then pushed to the upstream service provider. Now that service provider, they had automation in place. So as soon as the ticket comes in, even before somebody, a human could touch that ticket, the system will run system checks, do certain testing, and if that testing doesn't yield much, they will close the ticket, no fault found or no problem found, and close the ticket and push it back to the downstream provider. And what happened here is almost a week later, so the company would provide MIS reports every week. A week later, they see that, how did we have about 30% increase in complaints? First of all, it seemed like an anomaly, but 2 weeks later, the 30%, 35, that kept on going. And they're thinking, what happened? Like, how did we started receiving so many complaints? But then as people analyzed the data, they could see the pattern. They could see a clear pattern that the same complaint is going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, so many times. Why is that happening? Then we realized that our automation, so we had an automation on one side, which is automatically saying there is no fault and pushing back. Apparently, there was another automation on the receiving side, on the retail provider side, and that had different, say, rules, algorithm rules, as to what they treat as the case close. So if your automation sends response within an hour, I can't tell you much about the rules that they have, but that will reopen the ticket, that bot. So essentially what we realize that it's a two automation bots having this field day of a table tennis, right? And that brings me to another point, which is very critical. We often understand that we have to be collaborative, we have to have collaboration amongst the teams, amongst people. But did you ever realize that there has to be a collaboration, a real collaboration amongst systems? Whether it is our Mousetrap system with LoRaWAN network, with the third-party CRM system, or with the retail service provider versus wholesale service providers, two bots working together. Had they consulted each other as to what's going on even before developing this system, this wouldn't have happened. Had we consulted with LoRaWAN network provider beforehand, we wouldn't have faced this problem. So it's not just the collaboration between the people, it is amongst the system, but systems don't collaborate on their own. You have to intervene, right? If you think at a system level, and that's the big point, we as the product developers cannot just think about product as a one-point thing. We have to think as if it's a whole system, and we have to see how it is connected together. And then only we can intervene if we see that there is a collaboration required amongst the systems as well. How to do it is a good question. Now, how to do it, I believe, you must have heard a tool called process mapping. Now, process mapping helps, but cross-functional process maps are much, much better. And so if you're using cross-functional process maps, they will provide you not just the process view, the journey view, customer's journey, they will also provide you how the handoffs occur. And some good cross-functional process map also enlist systems, so how one system hands off to another system, and so on and so forth. And that's very crucial to understand these system collaborations. So that's that. So My point is, product design is less about technology. It is more about the customer, of course, and their overall journey. They don't use your product because your product is cool. They do it to solve the problem, right? To achieve something, their intent, their problems. And there are many ways to achieve that thing for a customer. So it's not that your product is the only thing they got to use. They have all other alternatives. And if we don't pay attention to customers, customers will choose the path of least resistance to get what they want, right? To go where they want to go. And as we understand this, we will be able to develop our products much better. I help my clients with pragmatic solutions, product design, helping them create more sustainable businesses for better futures for everyone. And I speak and interact with numerous people as a part of my work. So I see people have started to look at their lives pretty differently now. Now our world needs a very different kind of innovation. Products that are not just proverbial better mousetraps, but something different, something transformative. People appreciate products that help them in dealing with their problems in a better way. But they appreciate it more if something eliminates those problems, right? So when you see your product as a part of their ecosystem instead of being part of your product's ecosystem, things change. Customers are looking forward to something that can change how they live, work efficiently, remotely, anywhere, effectively. So from experience, I know that delivering these kind of products is possible, these kind of services is possible with the right mindset. That being said, I wish you all the best for your product development journey. I'm sure you may have some questions, so let's have them.
Well, thank you, Anand. Well, who would have thought the intricacies and the nuances of building a smart mousetrap, right? As soon as you started with the fact that it's a smart mousetrap with IoT, I thought that would be easy, right? IoT. But then all of those ecosystems and all of those different sort of interconnected systems, I think one sentence really comes to mind is the Mike Tyson statement around everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? I think one of the related questions that's in the chat, and I think it really applies to what you're speaking about, this mindset, this sort of more holistic thinking beyond the technology and the product, is currently in our education curriculum, pretty much anywhere, there isn't really any coverage for sort of that API or technology or product customer-centric mindset. Should this be part of the curriculum for our young generation coming up? As you say, they need to be more transformative, innovative. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I do have thoughts on that because I have two kids and I know how that happens in their day-to-day lives, and how I am thinking, like, how many things they learn and how many things I need to teach them to make them think like that. So one of the things I believe that it exists in some parts, but it needs a bit more structure and amplification, and we have to demand is teaching people, teaching kids, and teaching adults as well, as to not just think on a point basis, like, hey, what do you want? And you say, look, I have this problem. Can you give me? Can I ask one more question? Right? Can I ask one more question? Why? What are you trying to do? What do you want this? When there's a saying that give man a fish and you take care of his meal, but teach them how to fish. That's a different story. So the education goes more on teaching, giving a fish rather than teaching how to fish. There has to be a good balance, and I think if that is not there, of course it's a long process, but we can do that as a parents. If we have kids, we must try and do that as much as we can.
I think it's really that whole kind of 5 whys, right? I have a problem.
Yep.
Why? So I think I really resonated with that last point you mentioned around. I mean, I'm a fan of process mapping, value stream mapping, but cross-functional process mapping, that's where it really gets hard. I mean, with your battle-hardened experience, do you have any suggestions for how to overcome the silos that happen in the enterprise when it comes to conducting such an exercise?
Look, one thing I believe truly is, if you look at the team itself, like one team, there are really no problems when a process happens. You will often find problems happen at the edge of two teams, right? The handoff,
Okay.
and somebody drops the ball. So in order to do that, I believe uh, having this inter-team, not inter-team, interdepartmental communication, whether you do a workshop and try and see like, hey, how our two teams interact with each other. Let's map it out, right? You have your process map, how you do your job. I have my process map, how my team does my job. Can we map them out? Can we see where do handoffs occur? And probably, if you want to go one step extra, do this premortem analysis and think about like, hey, this is the handoff. What can go wrong in this? What are the different scenarios, right? Kind of scenario planning, that what would go wrong, and if that goes wrong, how are we going to deal with it? Instead of just passing the blame, how are we going to deal with it? Do we have a policy? Do we have a strategy to deal with that? Do we know how we detect those things? So these kind of dialogues, when we initiate, and I've done that previously with so many companies, this dialogue not just reduces the friction, but also works at a very different level where we talk about having employees uh, like friends. We don't see them as another co-worker. We see them as a friends who is we are working together on that. So that really helps when you do cross-functional process mapping in a format of a dialogue, in format of
Yeah.
a workshop.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So more of a relationship base as opposed to that formal sort of. Yes. Thank you for that. And you and me, we go back a while, back in 2019. Love the thought provoking thoughts and the principles, and definitely looking forward to some chats offline as well. Thank you for your time, Anand, and yeah, we'll wrap up this session for the morning strategy stream.
Cool, thank you. And anybody wanted to find me online, offline? Well, offline is a bit difficult these days, but online, search for Anand Tamboli on LinkedIn, Google, wherever you will be able